Welcome to our October education meeting. I'm glad to see everybody here. Please make sure if you haven't that you sign in. Back there at the end of the meeting, we'll do some drawings for some gas gift cards for everyone that's physically in attendance. Welcome to anyone that's watching our stream on Facebook. I would like to introduce you guys to Rachel. She is from WSU in the Suspenders for Hope program, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about that. So Rachel, whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Tara and everybody here for inviting us out to come talk to you guys. Like she said, my name is Rachel Gladden. I work for Wichita State. My job title is the Alcohol and Other Drugs Programs Project Specialist. We do lots of harm reduction campaigns on campus, making sure that students have the resources they need. But we also have lots of community-oriented programming. So our community-oriented programming is known as Suspenders for Hope. Has anybody here heard of Suspenders for Hope? Oh my gosh. Yay! Oh my gosh. Yeah, we love Dr. Provines. And so today I'm going to be talking a little bit more about what Suspenders for Hope is, what we offer for the community, and what might make sense for you if you would like to partner with us and impact your spheres of influence. So for this evening, I'm just going to give a little bit of a background on Suspenders for Hope, some of our context, how we came to be. I'm going to go over some of our prevention trainings. Many of you who have heard of us have likely heard about our Preventing Suicide training, but we also have other prevention trainings that we offer for the community. I'm going to talk a little bit about our Hope Kits. Those are crisis intervention toolkits that we offer to crisis centers here in Wichita and on our campus. And so we're going to go over that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about other resources that we have available for you guys and answer some questions. I'm going to give a brief overview, again, like of each of these things, but I'm pretty entrenched in Suspenders for Hope, so I'm going to try to pause for questions because I do this programming all the time. I give trainings, I give presentations, and so I might skim over something and you're like, what is that? Can you elaborate on that? And I would be more than happy to. So just let me know and raise your hands for any questions. So Suspenders for Hope is a strategic, comprehensive approach to reducing mental health stigma, strengthening connections, improving emotional well-being, and encouraging help seeking in our community. So Suspenders for Hope was actually developed at Wichita State. It includes this awareness campaign that emphasizes protective factors against things like suicide prevention, substance misuse prevention, domestic violence prevention, and sexual violence prevention, as well as like the promotion of wellness. So the colors that you see here are all have their own like topic area. So yellow is suicide prevention, red is substance misuse prevention, purple is sexual violence prevention, and green is the promotion of wellness. Promoting wellness, promoting connection, promoting community has been shown by studies to prevent all of the things that you see here. That is why when we talk about suicide prevention, which I'll show you a little bit more in a little bit more detail about like the things that we go over, we always relate things back to hope and how we can impact our communities. Like, of course, there is protocol for crisis intervention. There's resources to be disseminated. But we want to make sure that our partners have tools to be able to strengthen, again, connections to the community. So you'll hear a lot about that tonight. So along with some of the awareness campaign content, like promoting our t-shirt, we also have wellness curriculi that allows partners to implement wellness strategies into their workplaces. So I don't know if the people who have heard of Suspenders for Hope have heard of like our wellness cards. We might talk about that a little bit later, but they're just simple activities that you can do with your employees, with the committees that you may be a part of, to again spread awareness for like mental health and normalize like some of those conversations. Again, we're going to be talking about some of those like prevention trainings in more depth. And we also have an advocacy program. So if you're interested in learning more about how to be a mental health advocate, capital M, capital A, once you take some of our trainings, like we can give you more information about what that could look like. I think, so with the awareness campaign, I think that I get lots of questions about why suspenders. And so I think that this is an appropriate context to kind of give you some of the background about that. So again, like I mentioned, Suspenders for Hope began at WSU. And we do lots of programming for back to school, orientation, just to make sure students are connected and have access to lots of resources. And one of our psychologists there would play this game show like Family Feud that would kind of get students engaged with learning about resources. And he would wear suspenders. And he called himself Dr. Suspenders. And he was well known on campus for this activity. Like students would take pictures of him, they would come up to him and talk to him. And so when we were trying to figure out how to, I guess, really broadcast our campaign and what we were wanting to improve on in the campus, we wanted to marry our idea with something that the students were already talking about and like already doing. And so we always say that like suspenders, like you can learn to support others the way that like suspenders support your pants. That's kind of like the short answer of it. But there was this like, I guess, grassroots campaign to kind of spread awareness about like counseling services on campus and like what we do. So that's kind of the context for that. So if you ever have questions about that or get questions about that, that's the reason. Yes. So I think that the campaign itself began a year or two before 2018, and then 2018 is when we launched our preventing suicide training, which was like the biggest, I guess, jump that we made from just being like resourcing to like offering programming for people. So I guess around 2018. So a little bit more about our trainings. Suspenders for Hope wants to make sure that it spreads health education that is not common knowledge or readily available to people in the community. Like we said, we want to spread awareness, we want to be on social media, we want to be present, but we recognize that not everybody has the time to dig into like mental health research, especially on topics such as like sexual violence, and intersections with substance misuse and things like that. So we have created these trainings that are about 2 hours that allow participants to sit back and participate and learn from some of our prevention specialists and experts. So like I mentioned a minute ago, in 2018, we launched the, oh, is that my voice? Oh, that's so icky. Yeah. So in 2018, we launched the Preventing Suicide training. The training itself like normalizes like help-seeking behavior. It helps decrease stigma, and it provides those like locally, culturally relevant resources. So you'll see this here. Since we've had this training live since 2018, we have a lot of different versions of this training. We recognize that like the general information is important, but acknowledging the nuances of different demographics and communities and making sure resources and content is tailored to those communities is a part of best practice. And that's part of adhering to research. And so we have developed and launched an LGBTQ plus version. We are launching our veterans version next month. Like, again, these are demographics that are higher risk for suicidal ideation and completing suicide. We're working on one for Indigenous communities. I think we have one for healthcare workforces. We have a Spanish version. We are getting the Vietnamese one live. And we have a Catholic version, and we have one that's specific to the Wichita State campus. So again, this training has been live for several years, and so we've had the opportunity through different grant funding to tailor some of this information. The Promoting Wellness and Preventing Suicide training, like the general version, is free online. So we can come give this training to your at your places of employment, to students, again, to those committee meetings. But if you as an individual are interested in learning more about like crisis intervention, this training is just free online at suspendersforhope.com. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. So our second one that we have offered for the community is our substance use and mental wellness training. So this training was launched earlier this year. We got funding from Kansas Fights Addiction to create a training that specifically delves into the intersectionality of substance use and mental health. And so we obviously don't have as many versions of this training, but we are working on bolstering those offerings and finding ways to tailor content for different communities, such as indigenous populations and things like that. So we'll go in more in depth about the facilitator workshop program a little bit later. So I wanted to share a little bit of the content that we cover in some of these trainings because they are really the basis for our wellness programming as a whole. So a lot of the content you'll see in the trainings, you will see on our website, on our social media, as standalone resources that kind of complement the trainings themselves. And of course, you don't have to consume both of those things, but they really get to the core of our values and what we are wanting to educate the community on. So I'll start with our promoting wellness and preventing suicide training. I guess you'll see some of the font translation did not go super well. Sometimes that happens. I don't know what you guys store your files on, but we use Teams and it's a nightmare. Anyway, not relevant. Let's see. So some of the more specific goals of our preventing suicide training, again, this is about a 2-hour training. We learn more about suicide in general. We go over specific statistics that are national, that are local. You learn more about the signs and symptoms of suicidal ideation and the difference between suicidal ideation and a situation where suicidal ideation might escalate to a crisis. You learn how to have conversations with people. We talk a lot about stigma. One of the best ways you can protect people in your community is learn how to talk about some of these things, learning how to break stigma by having conversations about mental health, about suicide. Dr. Provines, who is wonderful, she's one of the co-founders of Suspenders for Hope, and she's a psychologist at WSU, and she's the assistant vice president for wellness. I remember I went to a suicide prevention training that she did, and she was up at the front, and you could kind of tell that the audience was nervous to be going over some of this content. And she goes, okay, on the count of 3, I want everybody to say the word suicide. And everybody was like, what? And she's like, we're going to say it together. And 3 times, everybody said the word suicide out loud. And it felt a little bit silly, but it was really helpful in just kind of getting everybody comfortable having those conversations. And that's really what we're here to do. Learn about available resources and more specific information to mental health professionals. So when we're talking about understanding suicide, again, we go over the statistics in the training about rates of suicide, but we also look at the rates of suicidal ideation. So for those of you who might not know, suicidal ideation is the intentional or passive thoughts of wanting to die. It's not a set plan. It's just the thought it would be nice if I could just be run over by a bus. I wish I could die today, or something to that effect. And when we are presenting this information, we are trying to normalize the discussions about suicidal ideation by showing that 3.2 million people have had suicidal thoughts. And that is compared to about 50,000 people who have actually completed suicide. And 50,000 is too high of a number. And that's why we're here having this conversation today, obviously. And with 3.2 million people who have had suicidal thoughts, it should not be as taboo as it is to have a conversation about mental health, to ask for help, to offer help to people in communities. And so that's kind of the gist of what we talk about in some of the trainings. We also acknowledge that suicide is a complex phenomenon. We often hear people discuss suicide as being a response to a single event. Someone has lost a family member. Someone has a traumatic event. But there's lots of different factors that contribute to completing suicide or struggling with suicidal ideation. And so talking about risk factors, protective factors, precipitating events, all of those, I guess, clinical vocabulary words, we kind of go over and talk about how they are relevant to you as you are practically trying to help people that you care about and people in your community. One one of the tools we give you to help people in your community is with something called SAS. So that's an acronym that we developed at WSU for Suspenders for Hope. It stands for Share, Ask, Support. This is the simple acronym that we promote to help people remember how they are to approach situations where they are wanting to intervene in a crisis. So I typically don't give the preventing suicide training, but I give the preventing substance misuse training. And we also use Share, Ask, Support. And I think what I tell the participants of the training that I give is that, like, you already notice things about the people you care about. It's just taking that step to have a conversation and offer help that people often struggle with or feel nervous to do, especially on topics they don't feel like they are experts in. And so this is where we want to empower people to take that step to intervene. So in sharing, you are sharing your concern when someone is in distress. You are letting them share as well. When you are asking how they are feeling, you ask directly, and in this case about suicide, by saying, have you had thoughts about taking your life? That can be a really intense conversation to have. And again, in the training itself, we talk a lot about it. We talk about our feelings about it. We talk about some barriers to intervention, but we really teach about how to say those words and be intentional about the language that you use so that people feel comfortable sharing. If you are comfortable saying the word suicide, or you're comfortable saying the words like to take your own life, the other person might feel comfortable enough to offer up information and talk honestly about how they're feeling. Does that make sense? Okay. And then finally, supporting with your presence or by connecting to community members or resources that might be more relevant for depending on how the person is feeling. So obviously you can show support by taking their gun home with you, or by sitting and talking with them, or by connecting them to crisis resources like here in Wichita, like ComCare. It really depends on the situation. And again, in the training, we go into much more depth about what this looks like. And we also talk about how Share, Ask, Support is relevant to you. Part of creating connections in this community is not just giving and giving and giving and giving. And I know that if you're in this room today, you are people who genuinely care about helping your community, and giving is something that has likely been a big part of your life, and that is wonderful. But part of really strengthening those connections is also learning when you need to ask for help, and really learning about how to increase help-seeking behavior, and helping people feel comfortable to reach out when they need it. So we also apply the Share, Ask, Support to learning how to share your distress with someone who can support you, asking for help when you need it, and learning that it is normal to reach out to some of those resources just when you need someone to talk to. And so I know I spent a lot of time on this slide, but this is kind of a brief overview of some of the tools that we give you. Does anybody have any questions about this slide so far? Okay. And obviously, there's a difference between having a difficult conversation about mental health and a crisis situation, and we make that very, very clear in this training. We talk about resources that are local, again, culturally relevant, and we also provide national resources that might be helpful. But ultimately, with this training, we are wanting to emphasize the importance of hope, healing, and recovery. And so one of the biggest protective factors against suicidal ideation, and against using maladaptive coping behaviors, is really having a sense of purpose and a sense of hope. And so when we have Suspenders for Hope, it's like connection to bolster hope in our communities. And so we connect everything back to that, because having a depressing ending to a depressing topic is not always very helpful for people who are looking to know how to help other people. So that's kind of a summary of our preventing suicide training. And it's kind of a summary as well of some of the materials and values we have around suicide prevention. I can take questions later if you think of any, but does anybody have any big picture questions about that? Cool. Then we'll move into our substance use and mental wellness training. So our substance use and mental wellness training is a little bit different in that it is, it's a little bit more conceptual. So some of our goals are to learn about stigma related to substances and how that impacts community. There's stigma related to all of the topics that we cover in Suspenders for Hope, but the stigma around substances is very steep, and I will say moralized at times, and that makes it very difficult for people to ask for help, and difficult for people to intervene when they think somebody needs help. And so we really want to lean into that nuance in this training, and talk about maybe some of the assumptions that we have, and how that impacts what is going on. Other people. Is it on the timer? I wonder. Oh, that's probably fine. Okay. The next thing that we go over is discussing factors that influence substance use across different contexts, understanding how substance use is related to the dimensions of wellness as dictated by SAMHSA, learning how to recognize that signs with the relationship with substances is unhealthy, and then obviously some of those resources. The primary lens that we use at Suspenders for Hope to discuss substance use is harm reduction. So harm reduction is something that's often politicized. And so I know that there are lots of strong thoughts and feelings about like harm reduction techniques at times. But the principle of minimizing risk and furthered harm is really the staple of how we approach substance misuse and what we want to give to our participants in this training. So we do a lot to compare. I think when people think of harm reduction, they often think of like needle exchange programs, or naloxone and like overdose prevention and things like that. And those are harm reduction techniques. But the principles of harm reduction, I mean, we see that with any behavior that can be risky. So like using a seatbelt, or using sunscreen or using a helmet, things like that. We want to normalize this idea that harm reduction is good for the community and ultimately about putting someone's safety over your own opinions about their behavior. So again, that's how we're framing this content and meeting people where they're at. Part of breaking down stigma is giving some people some language. We talk a little bit about language in the preventing suicide training, but here stigmatizing language is a huge barrier for a conversation between somebody who's in recovery and somebody who is trying to help someone who's in recovery or relate to someone in recovery. So when we have someone who is using words like substance abuser, right? Abuser has an accusatory connotation to it that really isn't necessary for the behavior itself. And so we kind of talk about how, yes, these are technical terms, these are clinical terms, but they're also really helpful in how you are building relationships and connections with other people. So that is something that we go over in depth. The next thing we go over is the Safe Projects paradigm of assumptions. Safe Projects is a national organization that promotes harm reduction practices on college campuses in the community. They're really awesome, and they've been a really big supporter of Suspenders for Hope as we've grown this part of our programming. But we spend about 30 minutes here talking about assumptions that you have made, not just about people who use substances, but about how to help people who use substances. So there's lots of different ways that you can think about how to help people who use substances, but we have it broken up into 4 different paradigms that define what you believe, how you help, and why you do it. And this is not to give people a right answer on how to think about substance misuse, but if we can make sense about how these paradigms or how we help show up in our perspectives, we can be more intentional about our impact on our community. And that's ultimately what we are here to do. We also use intervene, share, ask, support. We have added the intervene model into this acronym because it is helpful for framing the different ways that you can intervene in a instance where someone is misusing substances. In a suicide prevention like crisis situation, you are going to intervene. You have decided to intervene by just having the conversation with somebody, right? But intervening in an instance of substance misuse that is an overdose is a little bit more nuanced. And so we kind of talk about, of course, share, ask, support, how to have conversations with people. and things like that. But we also go a little bit more in depth on what intervention can look like and what makes sense depending on the context. Another way that we kind of ascribe nuance to how to help individuals is we talk about how do you know if someone needs help, right? If someone, in the case of a mental health crisis, is like self-harming or they're using language that is really dangerous, it can be fairly obvious that you would want to take steps to intervene. But everybody's relationship with substances is their own, and so it can be harder to determine whether or not you need to help somebody or if what you would do is right for the person that you are connecting with. And so we use SAMHSA's dimensions of wellness to kind of frame when and how help can be needed. So if we have someone who is, let's say, drinking to cope with a really stressful job, that is harming their occupational wellness by potentially impacting their work-life balance. But it also can be harming their emotional wellness because they're not really talking about their emotions. They're like drinking to cope. And we go in depth about how to have conversations without like judgment. But like if you're framing it as, I want to help this person's emotions, I want to help this person at their job, I want to help their physical health, it takes a lot of that judgment out of conversations. It takes a lot of that, well, you should be doing this. Your relationship with substances should look like this. That can kind of be a little bit like, whoa, I don't want to talk to this person. They're going to tell me what to do. Like that can kind of like, I guess, inhibit connection. It can inhibit help for somebody. And so again, we articulate this in the training and have activities that people practice with in real life scenarios that give some people tools to use. And one of the last things that we go over is we talk about overdose prevention. We are in an opioid epidemic. Fentanyl is something that comes up in the news a lot. I talk about it every day because that's what people want to talk about on the topic of substance misuse, and for a good reason. So we talk a lot about those statistics, but we also relate this back to harm reduction when we give techniques that have saved people's lives. So things like naloxone. I'm sure because you guys are down here, you've heard about the free naloxone vending machine. We love to see it. There's one open in Reno County. Basically, we are wanting to normalize the idea of carrying things like naloxone, even just accepting that having something like naloxone or people using naloxone isn't enabling. It is saving lives. It is putting personhood before policing behavior. Those are some of the conversations that we have, again, to make sure we're just increasing the net safety of people in the community. So we go over overdose prevention. We talk a little bit about fentanyl and like what it is and give people an opportunity to answer questions or ask questions. I answer questions. And then we talk a little bit about naloxone and other harm reduction techniques. But ultimately, your relationship with substances is your own. And we recognize that people choose to use for a myriad of reasons. And so it is not our job to tell someone how to live, but it is our job to support someone's health and well-being. And this training covers what that looks like with this kind of nuanced topic. That's kind of the summary of the substance use and mental wellness training. Does anybody have any questions about that content? Yes, please.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
You mentioned that this is the type of training that you're teaching. What's the actual duration or length of the course itself?
That was a great question. Both of these trainings are about 2 hours. I think the online preventing suicide training is about 90 minutes because there isn't a lot of back and forth, but both of these, when presented, are about 2 hours. This one will be online by December. So part of our KFA funding is getting this finalized and putting it online and offering that to the community, but that should be done and uploaded by December. Any other questions? Okay. So what does this have to do with you guys? Right. Oh, wow. Yeah. And so when we give out this content, We want to give you guys like the tools, like when we present. But for people like you guys who are invested in your community, we want to give you the opportunity to actually like disseminate some of this content. So in 2023, we got a grant from KDADS, and that allowed us to create a facilitator workshop for the preventing suicide training. And with our Kansas Fights Addiction funds, I don't know why I'm naming grants like you guys care. It is a big deal to my brain that it's compartmentalized in different grants. But anyway, we have facilitator workshops for both of these trainings. So essentially what that does is it allows us to supply you with the information and the tools. So like supplies, t-shirts, all sorts of stuff to give these trainings to your spheres of influence. Yes, we want to make sure as many people see this content like as possible, but when you give the facilitator workshops, you know more about your spheres of influence than we do. I gave a facilitator workshop for the substance use and mental wellness training last week, and I was talking with somebody who works for missing and murdered Indigenous women, women and individuals. And she was talking about the facilitator workshop, and she's like, these are things that I would change just because of who I would be giving this to. Because as much as I care about the Native community, I am not in that culture, and she is. And so when she presents this content, it is that much more meaningful to the people in the audience because she has that context. And so these facilitator workshops are free because of the grant funding. That's why it matters. Because of the grant funding, we can give you the t-shirts, we give you the supplies, we give you the training. All you need to do is sign up. So if this is something that is interesting to you, if this content is something that you could see having an audience for, I know that I've given facilitator workshops and people are like, I think I could give this training once a year at like a staff retreat. Great. Take the stuff. We'd love to see it. But that is an additional offering to our program. So essentially we have our trainings themselves, we have the facilitator workshop that you can participate in, and that is where you can kind of meet your spheres of influence with some of our content. Does anybody have any questions about that?
I am going to interrupt and say that one of the things that we are working on in 2025 is doing some extra programs other than our monthly education programs, like over a lunch hour or like this. And so we already have people who are interested in Nami, Wichita getting trained in both of these programs so that they can then take the facilitator workshop so we can present it to our sphere of influence. Yeah. So just cool. FYI, if you're interested in that, see me.
We're excited about it. So if there's no questions about this, and again, oh yes.
Where are you, that substance use training, where are you going, or you have people that present it too, don't you?
Yep.
Where all are you?
So we actually partner with the Phoenix Gym downtown, so the recovery gym, and we have a class that we give once a month. And so if you have the Phoenix app, that is where you can register for that training. If you want the dates for that, I don't have them like on me, but afterward I can look it up on my Outlook and we can talk about it and get you signed up for that. But we give the base training for that like every month at the Phoenix, and we give the facilitator workshop once a month this year, once every other month starting next year, and that's just a conversation you would have with me or whoever is giving the training at the training. So very good question. Where do these things happen?
Are you, I presume that you're going to do something.
Absolutely. Yep. So we do, so the community ones are at the Phoenix, and we offer a monthly substance use and mental wellness training. We have some tailored for students. We use data that we collect from the WSU student population that we implement into some of the content that we do. So we do those as well, but those are like just for students. So yeah, we have.
I think that's big need.
Yes, no, absolutely. Yeah, we also do at WSU, we also offer DECA's naloxone administration training. So recently at WSU, we got approved to distribute naloxone as a campus department. I say recently, it was about a year ago. And so I chair one of the subcommittees that supervises preventing substance misuse, and our initiatives has really been emphasizing overdose prevention. So we offer this like naloxone administration training. We have naloxone that we give, and all of that stuff like comes from DECA, and it has been really popular. And students have been really excited to see things like that. And so we were excited because we weren't sure if they were going to know what naloxone was, but they do. And so we've had a lot of opportunities to kind of like bolster our programming for students in the past year or so.
College, you probably not involved with
Schools,
lower level.
yeah, so K through 12 is tricky because there's state regulations, local regulations. I think for organizations that aren't related to the school districts, they have to be like invited in. And so we've had conversations that we've like started with different communities in like different school districts. But the need that we've seen and that we've been trying to figure out like how to meet is for teachers. So educating the kids is absolutely so important. And this content is good to present to people who are, I think, as low as middle school can receive this content. But having this education for like teachers, since these are like based around how to have conversations, like we've been trying to figure out how to make sense of that. But K through 12 is a little bit more tricky. Yes.
So actually, there's a couple of questions on the live stream, and I was not paying attention. So sorry about that, folks. First off, the person on here says that they would love to see this for Women to Women 316. So, and Bernstein, I think you know what that. They said, we would love to see this for Women to Women 316. And they mentioned Bernstein's name and Candace Ford. Okay, so, yep. So that's in your ballpark now, Bernstein. So the next thing is they say, do you do training for youth and teenagers?
We can, but we are invited to do that. So like we don't have specific programming for high school age students because we are like based in the college in the like 18 to like 22 demographic. But if there is someone who has an into that, we can provide that.
Okay. And then I think that's it.
Okay.
So yeah.
Cool. Yes.
Move back that your slides. I wanted to get of the way we're supposed to.
Oh, absolutely. This one,
I got my phone out.
is it this one? Oh, destigmatizing language. Okay. Yes, that's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. Does anybody have any other questions about the trainings? If not, the next thing I wanted to briefly touch on, I know I've been just going on and on about this stuff. But how many of you have heard of our Hope Kits? Has anybody heard of those? Hope Kits?
Oh, yeah.
Hope Kits? Okay, so for those of you who don't know, I have not worked on this project directly, so I don't have as much context for how these came to be. But I know that Dr. Provines talks about how one of her daughters was diagnosed with diabetes, and when she was coming home from the doctor, they gave her this kit with all these like resources on things that she could do to help her like cope with diabetes and like talk with other people and like connect with the community. And Dr. Provines, being who she is, was like, why don't we have this for like mental health crises? And I know, amen, right? And so what we did was we created these Hope Kits. So in these like boxes, we have like resources for coping that people can take home with them. So this is actually based off of a DBT or dialectical behavioral therapy tool. So it's essentially if you know that there is a space, whether it's a safe space or a box full of things that is going to make you feel better, you are more likely to attend to that when you are at an elevated state rather than going to other maladaptive coping skills. So like you plan out like your coping toolkit before you enter into like a crisis, we'll say, where you would want to like potentially self-harm or drink or do something that might not be safe for you. And so we have created these kits for these individuals who might need them. So right now we are disseminating them at ComCare and at the CAPS or the Wichita State Counseling Center for students. But they include things like gun locks. We have like coloring kits. We have journals. We have med cap locks for people to put on their like medications. We have like a little Suspenders for Hope pin that's like magnetized and not sharp, and just kind of things like that. And we have a resource about creating your own coping toolkit that might not necessarily be like a crisis toolkit, but like I talk about this in the substance use and mental wellness training. Like, you know, part of the idea for coping is like knowing that something is going to make you feel good. Like if you know that you can have a glass of wine at the end of the day and it's going to make you feel better right then, right? Because you know that when you get home, that's going to be there. And there's nothing wrong with having a glass of wine at the end of the day. But if you wanted to shift that behavior, having something like this or creating something like this can be helpful. Oh, cool.
You know, probably still upstairs. Bags and crisis kits.
Oh, those are,
They still up there.
that's really cool.
Still at ComCare.
Cool. Yeah, this is not a new idea by any means. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, we've actually had the opportunity to like expand this program a little bit. So KU Med applied for some funding to create perinatal kits. So because women or individuals who have like given birth are at a higher risk for like depression and suicidal ideation, creating kits that are specific to that demographic and like that fit those needs have shown to be like really helpful. Or we are like looking to collect research, or I guess they are looking to collect research on how that can be helpful. And so we have these blue Hope kits that are very pretty, and they have a little like onesie on them with suspenders. Anyway, I find them very cute. But it's just really cool that we've been able to expand out in that way. So that's another piece of programming that you may hear of or that you might see. Does anybody have any questions about Hope kits? Okay.
We actually have a box upstairs that we forgot to pull down.
Oh, yeah.
I think at ComCare, is it at crisis?
Yes.
Is that where they're handing them out?
Yes.
That's what I thought.
Yes, that's a helpful distinction. Thank you. Ultimately, Suspenders for Hope is about supporting the message of hope as an individual. When we talk about people who partner with us, whether that's becoming a mental health advocate or participating in our trainings, be visible, be vocal, be vulnerable. This is how we spread awareness. This is how we break down stigma, and this is how we can create connection in our community. So these are just some ways to get connected with us. We're on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Phoenix app, all sorts of things. And if you are interested in learning more about some of our other resources, we have a website, SUSPENDERS4HOPE.com. So some of the stuff I've gone over today are like the free offerings, like the online trainings, facilitator workshops, things like that. And these are some other partners that we've had and we've been able to work with to create more specific resources. Yeah, that's about the end of the content that I have. What was that? Yeah, so Thrive Restaurant Group is a group, I don't know if they're based locally, but they own a lot of different restaurant chains and they supervise them. I think they've changed in the last year or so. I can't remember, but I know that they have been a really cool partner because individuals who work in restaurants that are higher risk for overdose, substance misuse, and suicide. And so they've really used our wellness cards to help like create community, create connection, and make sure that people have what they need when they're working in some of these spaces. So they've been really... Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a good point.
I don't know who they.
Yeah. But thank you for letting me talk about this and talk about Suspenders for Hope. If you have any other questions, feel free to grab me before I head out.
Anybody have any questions?
I'm just wondering.
Oh, absolutely.
Here on Sunday.
Yes, we'll have a table there on Sunday, and we'll have some of these resources out. So if you want to stop by and grab some more specific stuff, feel free. Cool. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, of course.
All right, guys. Well, speaking of Sunday, great segue. Thank you for that. As most of you already know, Sunday is the big day. Laura and I are very excited about Sunday. That is our candlelight service. We just confirmed today we are going to have 30 different resource tables available at our candlelight service. So we're very excited about this. We've also confirmed that we have Sandy Pickett from the Kansas Representative District 88 will be in attendance. The Wichita Chief of Police will be in attendance. We are finalizing the program as we speak. That's why I was up here on my phone doing. And so we're very excited for it. We need volunteers. If you have not sent your name to me, please email me your name and your interest, t.gwynn, GWYNN at namiwichita.org. By tomorrow evening, I'm going to send out on Thursday the list of volunteers and where I have all of you. If you don't want to volunteer, we still encourage you to come and bring all of your friends, coworkers, family members, friends, pack out the place. And then the other thing is on October 14th, don't forget, we have our Applebee's fundraiser at the Applebee's on Ridge Road, only on Ridge Road, all day. Mention Nami, bring a flyer. We got more flyers back there. If you do that, Nami Wichita will get 25% of whatever comes in from anyone that mentions it. So go there for lunch and dinner.
We do have to spend $150. Right?
I think that won't be a problem.
I hope so.
So, well, I have my church group going for lunch, so I guarantee you we will make the $150 minimum. And
Applebee's is a member of the Thrive restaurant.
Nice.
well, even there you go, double whammy. I like it. I like it when it all comes together, right? Perfect. Thank you, because I didn't get it up yet. All right. The only other announcement I don't have a flyer for, is if you guys have been halfway paying attention, we've gone to the last 2 Open Streets ICT events. The first one was way earlier this year at WSU. The second one was in the Nomar district. The third one is October 13th. It is a Sunday, and it's going to be Douglas. And they're shutting down like 4 miles of Douglas to do this event. I think they said last year they had over 30,000 people at it. So we're going to have a table there. And so this is an all hands on deck. If you can volunteer, even if it's just 2 hours, we will take any and all help we can get. So I will be sending an email out about that, asking for volunteers probably after candlelight service. So,
I have one
okay.
quick announcement. I swear that's it. We have 2 board members that will be going off their term. They've hit their term limits. No. And so we are looking for new board members. So if you would please pass this on. We have an application on the namiwichita.org website, or you can contact me, and I'll be happy to send out an application. I will tell you we're specifically looking for people with grant writing or fundraising or finance. And we could also definitely use somebody in the legal field, an attorney or a paralegal. So if you know anybody that is willing to give about 10 to 15 hours per month for a wonderful cause. Has your 2 years off the board been finished yet? I'm looking at you. But that's okay. David and Esther. But we're looking for anybody that has a passion for mental health and wants to make a difference in the lives of people in Sedgwick County. It's just those are the gaps that we kind of have right now. So thank you.
All right, so our live drawing for gift cards, Laura's going to randomize this. We have 3 of them.
And we will be doing this at all our education meetings for the foreseeable future. Okay, who is number 7?
Hang on. Number 7 is Rich Morley.
Are you sure?
All right.
Okay. Number 9.
Number 9 is Jason Platter. Thank you. There you go. All right, go ahead.
Number 13, lucky 13. Especially for Taylor Swift.
Tim Shook.
Nice.
Thank you. Yeah, right.
No, I just know her favorite number is 13.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
All right, last one. Last number.
Last number is 15.
Joyce Randall.
Yay!
There you go, Miss Joyce. All right, guys. Well, we're going to let you guys get out of here early. You can hang out until about 8:30, and then I'll kick you out of the building. So.
If you're on social media, please follow us and share our posts. And if everybody will stand, I'm going to